Hey everyone, this is Christoph with another Scale Your Code episode, and I'm really excited to have Steve Corona with me today. Steve Corona was the CTO of Twitpic, the largest photo sharing application for Twitter that later reached an agreement with Twitter. Steve went from sleeping on the floor to growing Twitpic to 50 million visitors, 20 billion HTTP requests, and petabytes of data, without any prior training or knowledge. He later went on to be the head of Platform API at Life360, where he designed a REST API that served over 1 billion requests per day. Just to put it into perspective, that's more volume requests than Wikipedia or WordPress back in 2013. Today, he is a principal architect for BigCommerce, where they power thousands of stores. In this interview, I'm going to ask Steve how he went from dropping out of college to being a scaling guru. And we're going to walk through the steps of scaling web applications. Steve, you are an inspiration to myself and many others, and it's great to have you here today.
Wow, thank you so much. That was an awesome intro, actually. Thank you very much.
Thanks, I appreciate
really
it.
appreciate it.
Thanks for being on here.
Yeah, no worries. I'm glad to be on and talk about my favorite subject, scaling.
Oh yes, one of my favorites as well. So you went to college a year and a half before dropping out, and you've called that year and a half your biggest mistake. What happened?
Yeah, so wow, that's a fun topic. So I was 18 years old and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had already been doing technology. I had been programming for like 4 years at that point, which is no different than a lot of people. A lot of people start programming early, and
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to do something with technology, but I wasn't really sure. I already had some decent skills, but no formal training. And my parents, my family is Italian, and really, came here when my mom was born in Italy. And so they had this immigrant mindset. College was a really, really, really big deal. Neither of my parents went to college. Both of my parents saw it as sort of their biggest mishap, not going to college, not getting formal training. They really saw it as something that had held them back in life. And they, as the sort of first person in my family to be born in the U.S. and hit the college age, it was this expectation that I would go to college, that I was smart, and that the next step to have a good life, to make a lot of money, to be successful, was to go to school. And honestly, I thought they were right. At 18, you kind of do what your parents tell you.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily think about these things on your own. They said, it's going to cost a lot of money. I had no idea, what does that even mean when you're 18. And I picked RIT, which is Rochester Institute of Technology, pretty well-known tech school. Barely got in, by the way, by the skin of my teeth. I mean, I actually thought I didn't get in, and I did. Turns out I did. So that was good. But it was very expensive. It was like $40,000 a year, and we weren't, we're middle class, and I had to take out a lot of student loans, and obviously kind of sign that I would say that I'd pay those back. And at the time, you're like $40,000 a year. How much is that? When you're 18, you have no idea. You're making minimum wage. So anyways, I went to school. I went to RIT. First year I did all right, but I was like waiting to kind of get to the meat of the stuff. I felt like I could get okay grades, and it was fine, but it didn't really keep my interest. And second year came around, and I had started, and it kind of wasn't really sure what I was doing there, and just wasn't into it. It wasn't for me. And that's not to say I didn't learn anything or that it wasn't valuable, but it just seemed to take an awful long time to get the knowledge that I wanted out of the classes.
Yeah.
So I just, I kind of weighed the pros and the cons, and I stopped going to class, which it turned out to work out well for me. Eventually I got kicked out. I had a 0.33 GPA, which is very low.
Right.
Actually, funny enough, sort of the best things I learned in college. So most people don't know this, but when you get a GPA at below like 2.0 in a lot of schools, they kind of put you on this academic probation. They want to keep their GPA average up.
Yeah.
So they don't let you just continuously, fail over and over again. they put you on this academic probation. And in my case, I had to take a special class for people that had failed the previous semester. And in this class, they taught really interesting but very valuable time management skills, and just different aspects of how to manage your day, how to manage your priorities, kind of to help the students get back on the right track. But actually, believe it or not, that class is one of the more valuable ones that I took in college, because
Wow.
up until then, you never learn how to do taxes in school. You never learn how to manage your priorities and manage your day and all these other valuable things. You never get taught that stuff. And that was the first time I'd ever been taught that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really valuable for me. But eventually, after academic probation, I pulled another, below 2.0 GPA. I think that was the semester I did 0.33, and I got kicked out.
And the reason I wanted to start with this question is because I'm actually still in college right now, and I'm about to graduate in December. And up until about a year and a half ago, I had some of those same frustrations. I just felt like society had asked me to pick some major that didn't even fit right for me. I just picked it because I wanted to get it over with and get that degree and keep moving on. But it was just so frustrating to me, and I know so many people are in that same situation. And so what kind of internal struggles did you go through after realizing that college wasn't for you, and that you were deciding to drop out, but you didn't want to not offend, but like, your parents were really supportive of you.
Sure.
You really wanted them to, or they really wanted you to go to school. How did you feel on the inside?
Yeah. Well, I knew that. So it's weird when I got kicked out. It was this huge relief inside, internally. I felt so relieved that I could actually sort of do what I wanted to do, which it would, at that point, I had a job at a web design agency, and I was just getting my feet wet, sort of my career started. And I knew that I wanted to do something, and I just felt like when I was in college, I sort of felt like it was this thing that I had to do, that sort of I'm supposed to be an adult and I can choose what I want to do and what I don't want to do. Yet I was forced that I had to keep going to school. And so that was really frustrating to me. It was always like, why am I spending my time doing this when I want to do this other thing? And I should be able to choose that because I'm an adult now. So I felt very relieved because I could spend time doing the things that I valued, that I thought were important, which was, my work. But, externally, it was really, really a struggle. I mean, I lied to pretty much everyone in my family, even most of my friends. I had a lot of friends that, thought I was just doing an internship when I stopped going to classes.
Wow.
I would still hang out with them and stuff, but, they thought I was doing an internship. Same with my family. Turns out you can only go on an internship for so long before people start to realize that you're not actually on an internship, and kind of transition out of that. But there is, a lot of sort of deception in that point in my life of just like having to lie to people about this because I didn't want to tell my parents, because I didn't want to tell my family. It was, my entire family was very important, not just my parents. It was really a whole kind of communal thing that I would be the first to kind of take the family name through college and exit with a bachelor's degree. So it was really hard. It was a huge struggle. I wish that I had told them earlier. That really hurt some of my relationships with my family members, and I've been able to repair them. But it really, there was a huge struggle there, and it really was just, I felt good about it, but it was the sort of thing where just because you feel good about it doesn't mean everyone else you tell will feel good about it.
And obviously it turned out fantastic for you. I'm really happy for you. That's awesome. It's a great story. And but let's say we have somebody listening to this today or tomorrow or in a few years, and they don't feel like it's right for them either, and they want to take the pathway, they don't even go to college. What would you recommend that they work on? Like, let's say you're looking to hire someone, and you've got someone that's got great credentials, got a college degree, and someone that doesn't. What would differentiate them to the point where you would pick that person that doesn't have a degree?
Yeah, so, well, I want to back up for a step and say, first of all, to be very clear, like, I ended up getting really lucky. And I think that at the time, part of me thought, like, wow, I'm screwed, man. Like, I thought that at the same time, I felt good, but I thought maybe I had made the biggest mistake of my life, right?
Right.
And I think I very well could have. It ended up working out, but I don't think there's any guarantee. I think that it
Yeah.
really takes a particular type of person. And this is the same type of person, to answer your question,
Hmm.
the same type of person that I look for when I hire someone, and which is that really look for. I think I've defined it. It's still like kind of, you feel it when you know it, but I think
Yeah.
what it is a natural curiosity for things.
Hmm.
For in if you're hiring someone for technology, probably you're looking for a natural curiosity for technology.
Hmm.
Um, and the way I can gauge this is by talking with people, really, and understanding what are the things that they're playing with, what are the things that seem interesting to them, what have they learned, and obviously credentials and experience, I think, play into that,
Hmm.
and play into your mindset. But you can have all the credentials, but if you're not naturally curious, or you're not naturally a person that is a self learner, um, maybe dropping out of college is not actually the
Hmm. Hmm.
best thing for you, because really in life, to succeed, I think it all boils down to, you need to constantly be learning. And if college is the thing that forces you to do that, well, maybe then you're a good fit for college. But if you're just naturally that way anyways, then maybe you could do that without paying someone $40,000 a year.
Hmm. Hmm. This alone, honestly, could be an interview. Unfortunately, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I do want to talk about Twitpic and all the other amazing experiences that you had. But I knew this was going to be a fantastic interview. But let's move on and let's
Sure.
travel back to 2009 when you joined Twitpic and became CTO. How did you manage to land that job?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. Twitpic at the time when I had joined was way smaller than it is now, and it was way less popular. So, I had just gotten laid off from my first sort of real job. It was a salary job, and I thought I had hit the jackpot with that one, because again, I had no college degree. I still didn't have a lot of credentials.
Hmm.
I didn't have a ton of experience. I was still kind of building my career in software engineering, and so I thought I had it really good. And I went on vacation to Italy for 2 weeks with my family. Came back, and that day, my boss called me to the office, and he said, "Hey, Steve, I need to talk to you." I'm like, "Great, cool.
Oh,
We're going to talk about." I think I was expecting a raise, because it
oh
was just
man.
about my 1 year mark. So I'm like, "Cool, yeah, I'm gonna get that raise that I've been looking for." And he called me and he said, "Hey, bad news. We're shutting down this department, and I'm
Oh man.
sorry about it, but." And so he was, very nice, but everyone
Right.
else in my department also got laid off that day. And I remember so vividly, walked out to the parking garage, got into my Toyota Corolla that was, falling
Mhm.
apart. And I yelled at the top of my lungs, because I thought, wow, if I thought I like had made something, and I got lucky after skipping college. It's over. Like, I'm never gonna get another job. It was pretty good
Mhm.
money at the time. I thought, wow, this is it. This is it. That was my one chance, and it got blown. So,
Wow.
I really didn't know what I was doing, and I went home, and I spent the next week or so just like kind of looking around. What am I gonna do? I figured I'd give myself just a little bit of a break. Had a little bit of money saved up just to kind of figure out, what do I even do with my life. And I had a good friend actually that I had met in college. He was my RA, and he was on Twitter, and I didn't have a Twitter account at the time, but I said, I used to just go and check out his Twitter account every once in a while, and he had retweeted this guy that owned Twitpic, and this guy had written a blog post. His name was Noah. He was the
Mhm.
founder of Twitpic, and he wrote a blog post like pleading for help. If you know anyone that can help with PHP, I really need help scaling. I really need help figuring out what I'm doing. So I said, oh, that seems interesting. And conveniently enough, I just lost my job. Um, so I reached out to Noah, reached out to him, said, hey, this looks interesting to me. I'm looking for a job right now, whatever. And and so Noah reached out back to me, and at the time, he was really fighting with Noah built the first version of Twitpic, but he wasn't really a programmer or a software engineer. He was, knew enough code to be dangerous,
Right.
but was just not traditionally a programmer. His code was really bad. It was like
Uh-huh.
spaghetti PHP code, and just couldn't handle the scale. The site kept going down and down over and over again, and he was like on the verge of shutting it down. In fact,
Wow.
I think the week before we talked, like he was one button away from actually killing the whole thing because he was just so overwhelmed with stress. It wasn't really making too much money yet. There weren't a lot of users. I think there were maybe 30,000 or something like less than 100,000 at the time. So it's still very tiny, but picking up momentum.
Okay.
So he gave me a call and we're on the phone and he's like, yeah, I'm trying to get this caching thing, memcache set up. And I'm like, oh yeah, here, this is how you do it. You need to like check for this thing and set this value in your PHP. And he's like, okay, hold on, I'm going to do that right now. And he's like, you can hear him typing in the background. and we brought the site basically back up. We got it back up and running during my interview with him, and so then I got the job and I started, and we actually had never met. Noah was in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was up in Rochester, New York at the time. So we had met, we had decided, to work together and to build this thing together.
Okay.
Totally blind date, sight unseen, and it wasn't for like maybe 6 months before we actually met in person. But we had worked together and talked every single day for those 6 months. But it was a startup, man. There was no one else working there except for me and Noah. And, sort of in a startup, everyone does everything. And that's how I kind of fell into the CTO role. It's just sort of the natural growth of the role as we hired more employees and we grew bigger. And we scaled and really got the site under the control. It was just a natural evolution of the role.
Okay.
But yeah, so funny enough, like if I had never went and checked out my friend's Twitter and saw this retweet, I would have never.
That's insane.
My life would have taken a totally different fork or path.
And so you obviously had a little bit of knowledge at least to know that this is how you set up memcached, but you didn't have that much experience, did you?
No, not too much. Most of my experience had been, my previous job was very much. It was an ad, so there was some scale doing advertisements, like kind of Google AdWords style ads.
Okay.
The previous company did. There was some scale, but honestly, it was such a big company that most of the stuff that I had learned was like from playing around or setting up little things in my spare time and doing different side projects. That's probably where the bulk of my knowledge in general in life comes from, is like from screwing around.
Okay, so you go online maybe and you look at Stack Overflow posts, or you just install things on your computer and you start tinkering around with them and see what comes out of it, or
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. I always like to, I read Hacker News a lot. I always try to find interesting things, but then I think the key is to actually do something with them. So, I have a list of side project ideas that are a mile long, and I try to at least start them and maybe make a little progress and kind of play with the meaty part of it, like the interesting parts. And then half the time, probably more than half, 70% of the time, I don't finish them. But I get the value, the thing I wanted to learn, I get that out of it, and maybe I don't see it to completion. Right. But it really gives me a really wide breadth of different experiences and different tools and different ways of building things. And that's honestly, at the time I was doing that a ton, and that's where really, again, at the time was where all my experience came from. My job pre-Twitpic wasn't something that was super exciting. It wasn't a super high scale job. So really depended on a lot of self-learning. And again, like none of that stuff, to go sort of kind of back reference the college conversation, none of that stuff are things that I would have learned in college necessarily. They don't really teach you how to use memcache in college or some of these like how do you set up a production Linux server. Like you kind of learn that, I feel, by doing it versus just reading about it in a classroom.
Absolutely, I agree entirely with that. At least in my experience, that's been the case. And you took this experience from Twitpic and you wrote a book called Scaling PHP Applications. And of course, there's so much detail in this book that we can't possibly cover it all in here. But I want to give you your book a really quick plug, because like I told you before the interview, it's truthfully probably one of the best technical books I've ever read. And before I read your book, I knew probably about this much about web server architecture. And after reading it, I learned so much through trying it out and all this stuff that, I'm out of the webcam viewport right now. You can't even see my hand anymore because it raised the bar that much. But seriously, if you have any interest in being able to set up your own web server, database, load balancer, or anything like that, you've got to pick up this book. And All right, let's give people a taste of what your book is all about,
Sure.
and let's share what I've learned from your book and what you've learned from your intense experience at Twitpic. And let's start with talking about the LAMP stack. And most people, I feel like, are probably familiar with the LAMP stack, but just in case they're not, it stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And that's what most web servers are going to be set up with. But can you really take that out of the box and scale it to hundreds or thousands or even millions of users?
Yeah, so you can. It costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time. So what I learned building Twitpic. So when I started Twitpic, it was the traditional LAMP stack, right? Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. It wasn't tuned. It was the most basic configuration. It was kind of held together with band-aids, just enough to deal with the users we had, but no new ones, right? And so through experimentation over the years, in evolving Twitpic, I changed out pieces of the stack. I picked pieces that I liked. I got rid of pieces I didn't like and replaced them with alternative software. I tuned other areas of it. And what I ended up with was a stack that was Linux, HA proxy, Nginx, PHP, FPM, Redis, Rescue, MySQL, and
PHP? Did you say PHP?
Yeah, PHP, FPM.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically, I still kept a lot of the really the awesome parts of it, right? Linux. I'm not gonna use a different operating system. I'm not gonna run it on Windows. But what I ended up doing was tuning Linux and tuning it really well. I got rid of Apache. I feel like if you're building PHP apps, probably there's no reason to use Apache anymore. And now, depending on your language, there might be a valid use case, but you can solve for that. But if you're running Apache, it doesn't really make sense to use that anymore. You can use Nginx. Nginx is much faster, and the configuration to me is much saner.
Well, hold on one second. Let's take it one step at a time.
Sure.
When you say Linux, are you going to keep the maybe Ubuntu server? Are you going to keep that distribution, or are you going to use some other kind of distribution, or does it really matter?
I don't think the distribution matters. The sort of general advice, I don't like to get too much into sort of super micro optimization. I like to kind of shoot for the 80%. A lot of things can be solved with money, and if you can get sort of the best performance that's worth your time out of your hardware, that's what I like to shoot for. And then once you kind of can do that and repeat it, you can scale it to n number of servers just by buying more hardware. So I generally go with Ubuntu or Debian just because it seems to be the thing that everyone knows. It also has great package support. To me it's the easiest, but in my personal life I've used every distribution under the sun, and I always end up coming back to Ubuntu for servers, just because it's sort of kind of the standard that you can find anywhere. You don't have to build up your own custom AMI on Amazon or figure out how to make a custom image on some other provider. You can just kind of always count on the long-term stable of Ubuntu always being there.
Great. And then we get rid of Apache and we replace it with Nginx and PHP FPM. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Nginx is and why it is better? And I think you were talking about this before I cut you off.
Sure, yeah. Nginx is a web server. It does a similar job to Apache. The difference being that it's much more lightweight. It has a way saner configuration syntax. So to me, I find reading the Apache config to be very confusing, and Nginx kind of reads more like code, I would say, or like it's just more definitive to me anyways. And it can do most of the functionality of Apache. However, it's very focused on being a web server and not offering every functionality under the sun. It does HTTP really well. It can be a load balancer, but generally the way I use it is for two different things. I use it as my application server to serve up PHP. The thing with Nginx though is it doesn't, unlike Apache, it doesn't include PHP interpreter like built into the software. So Apache, you just run mod PHP, it builds PHP in right into Apache, and you can just run PHP sort of with zero configuration or very little configuration. Nginx, all it can do is it can talk to the local file system and say, here, serve up this file, picture.gif, or it can talk to an upstream server, whether that's another server that's speaking HTTP. So you might imagine in a load balancer situation, it can talk to other HTTP servers. Or if you want to serve PHP, you can use the fast CGI module and have Nginx talk to PHP running over the fast CGI protocol. But in order to do that, you need something that's running your PHP. And that's what PHP FPM is. It's bundled with PHP as of 5.3, I believe. And it basically runs a fast CGI server or daemon with your code. And then Nginx talks to that and says, hey, I want to run index.php. And PHP FPM figures out how to do that. Runs the PHP code, returns the result back to Nginx, and then Nginx returns that result back to your user. So it's a Nginx and PHP FPM, if you're building PHP apps, is a really powerful combination. Scales really well. The most important part, though, I think that when you talk about scaling, right, the thing that people kind of jump to is performance. How scaling must mean, how do you get the most users, or how do you have the fastest response time, or how do you have the most servers, or something like that. But in reality, scaling is a lot of things, and performance is one of those things. But the other piece that's important to scaling is monitoring and visibility, and how is my thing performing, and what's broken and what's wrong, and is it up right now. And the most powerful thing that you get from Nginx and PHP FPM is it gives you a lot of visibility. It gives you a lot of things to tune and to configure. With Apache and Mod PHP, since they're kind of really tightly coupled, there's not as much visibility. And I think that's the real advantage you gain with Nginx and PHP FPM. Yes, it's faster, but I don't think that's the reason why you switch. You switch for the visibility.
I got you. That makes a lot of sense. So then why do you think so many people still use Apache?
Well, Apache is easy, right? It's an out-of-the-box solution. It's not a bad place to start, but I don't think that's how you scale. I don't think that's how you provide. If you need to provide, a very reliable service to your users, again, scale is not just about performance. It's also about reliability and performance and stability. I think that's why you choose Nginx and PHP FPM. But if you're optimizing for what's the easiest thing to set up in the next 10 minutes, if you've never done Nginx and PHP FPM before, Apache is probably the way to go. Now, you can get really good at Nginx and PHP FPM and set it up in 10 minutes, but there's a learning curve, and it's probably a lot easier to get Apache rolling faster. But it's a good place to start. You're not locked in, but I highly recommend that if you're doing anything where you're doing PHP professionally, to invest in moving to Nginx.
If anyone listening to this or watching is interested in switching over to Nginx and you've never done it before and you're intimidated, Steve walks you through the configuration and optimization in his book, and I've read it. It's very easy to follow, very easy to understand. You can also check the documentation, as he said earlier, and I've wrote a tutorial of my own on the site here from my own experiences, so I'll link that below the video as well. And like you said, there is a learning curve, but I think if you put a little bit of time and sit down and look at it, after that, it makes a whole lot of sense. At least in my experience, it does. And now I can't see myself switching back, to be honest with you.
Awesome.
So what about MySQL? It really seems to get a lot of hate, especially when you talk about scaling and all that. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think so. A little backstory. At Twitpic, we never moved from MySQL. It was a huge pain point, but we figured out a lot of those pain points and creative ways around them.
Yeah.
So MySQL, it works really well. It's great software, and it works with everything, especially in the PHP world. I mean, everyone assumes PHP app. There's some way to talk to MySQL.
Yeah.
It's built into the language. You don't even need to install a separate library or something. But so what we ended up doing was figuring out the right hardware. We for a long time were using, I think, completely the wrong hardware. And part of that is during the time of Twitpic, SSDs really picked up steam, and you were able to get servers with more and more memory. But really, I mean, we scaled to hundreds of millions of rows. Close to 1 billion was our biggest table. And we ran that on a single within a single MySQL server. So we had multiple servers, but they were all slaves of each other. We didn't shard the data, so all of the data had to fit on a single server, and we were able to do that with close to 1 billion rows, with some nasty joins and stuff. And I think that MySQL also is sort of one of those pieces of software that you can spend weeks or months learning all of the different tuning settings and which ones are important and how does it impact your workload. And there's really, I mean, there's tons of different ways to tune it, and they make a dramatic impact. It's not one of those things where it's theoretical tuning where you're changing something and you're like, well, I think this will have an impact. A lot of the settings actually really do impact the performance of the software at scale, and it really totally depending on how you're using it. So what your queries look like, what kind of data engines you're using, whether you're using MyISAM or InnoDB, or what your hardware looks like. You can configure the amount of threads that are able to read from disk at any current time. And if you have certain types of hard drives, you want to set that a certain way. If you have SSDs, you want to set it to unlimited, for instance. And so there's just so many tuning settings. You can really either shoot yourself in the foot by setting the wrong tuning setting, or you can get into a situation that I think a lot of people are in, which is that MySQL is performing really badly, and you think it's because, well, MySQL is broken or my hardware is not fast enough. But I've seen plenty of cases where tuning like 2 or 3 different settings changes MySQL from being really, really, really slow to being like instantaneous, couple milliseconds per query, and just based on changing a configuration flag. So there's definitely a lot of, that's probably the biggest area where you can make major changes in scaling, just by tuning a couple of configuration settings and restarting MySQL.
Can you think of an example or two of settings that you can tweak that would give you such a drastic speed increase off the top of your head?
Yeah, so the ones that most people struggle with, not the most advanced settings, but basic ones like setting the size of your InnoDB buffer pool, having that set to a reasonable amount. I think the default is like 128 megabytes, which means that MySQL will only cache 128 megabytes of data at most. And when you're dealing with databases that are 50 or 100 gigs, 128 megabytes is tiny.
Right.
And so like setting that to at least half of the amount of memory available on the server is important. Or the other one is for well, depending on your use case, right, there's a flag to tell MySQL when it should commit data, that is to fsync the data to disk. And by default, it's doing that on every single, the commit of every single transaction. And fsyncs are really slow in general because of the nature of hard disk to actually take the disk and to confirm that it, or take the data and confirm that it's written a disk. And if you're using MySQL read slaves, you can actually set that to be a little bit more fast and loose, where it only commits every 1 second, or it commits never, and that really has a massive impact in the speed of writes in MySQL, especially for replicating data to different slaves. I've seen when a slave, you're bringing up a new slave and it's really out of sync, and it says it's behind by the master by like 3 days, and it's only going 1 second at a time, and you're like, holy crap, this is going to take forever. Changing this flag to say, oh, we'll never fsync for right now while you're committing or you're doing the replication. I've seen that like it's going to take 3 days go down to it's going to take 45 seconds. I mean, it really is a dramatic impact, and can be a tool to use as well.
So if somebody listening has never set up MySQL in a way where you have the master and slaves, can you quickly give an explanation of the concept of how that works?
Yeah, sure. So if you're at the point where you have enough data, or for whatever reason, if you want to basically have multiple MySQL servers, whether it's for performance or for backup or whatever, MySQL doesn't really support this thing where it's not clusterable by default. You really can't cluster MySQL. You can't use multiple servers. It kind of has this paradigm where all of the data needs to fit on one server. But what it does allow you to do is do this master-slave topography kind of thing, where you can have a master server that all of your write queries go to, and that master server replicates those write queries to multiple servers,
Okay.
and kind of replays those queries on multiple servers. So in theory, if you write to the master and that master replicates your writes to a handful of servers, they should all be in sync with the exact same data, as long as all of the queries always get replayed in the same order. And what that allows you to do is, well, now you have multiple servers that all have the same data set on them. And while you can only write to that master, because if he wrote to any of the others, they would get out of sync, you can read from all of them, which is really convenient if you're a website like Twitpic, where you maybe only upload 10 to 50 photos per second, but you have thousands of people reading the photos and viewing them every second. And so your read workload is much, much higher than your write workload. And while one server cuts it for writing, you need 10 or 20 or 30 to support all of the reads. So MySQL replication is really, really nice for that. But what it doesn't allow you to do, and sort of the pitfall, is all of your server always all of your data always has to fit on one physical server. So that means if you have a petabyte of data, every server needs to be able to hold a petabyte of data. You can't kind of split it up between all of these different servers, and that can be really inconvenient. So it doesn't cluster, but it allows you to support that multiple read workload really well.
Okay. So then you mentioned Redis, which can actually be used as a database, standalone database, but a lot of people, myself included, just use it for really fast caching. Have you ever used it for your primary database, or do you know of any famous examples of websites that do that?
Yeah, we ended up moving some piece. I think so. Okay, I agree. Like, yes, you can definitely use it as your primary data store. I don't think it's a great use case, not because the software is bad, but because MySQL is typically a much better choice for most people.
Okay.
However, where I see the real value, especially when you're talking about it as a primary data store, is moving really fast changing pieces of data into Redis. For example, we used it. So originally we counted the number of views to an image. So every time you'd view an image, we would update a counter and said, okay, this image has been viewed 40 times. Okay, you refresh the page, now it's been viewed 41 times, 42 times, whatever. We would use MySQL for that. And what it would cause is, you have this row, and most of the data is very, very static. It never changes. Once you upload an image, really, you can't change the title, you can't change the description, etc. But all of that data would be static except for the view count, and that would change really, really rapidly. And it was really a strain on the server, because now you need to write to MySQL for every single view, and that just doesn't scale. And what we ended up doing is moving just that field, the view count, moving that into Redis. And we really improved the performance of MySQL dramatically, because this table that was really write and read heavy, which means that it didn't really cache well because the rows were constantly changing. Now it just became this static data set, more or less, except for the new data that you're adding, the new images that are being uploaded. While the view count in Redis, was getting updated every single page view. But Redis supports that workflow really, really well, because all the data is in memory. It's really fast, and you don't have to worry about losing it, because it does persist it to disk. Now, it's not in the same way of MySQL, where all of the you're guaranteed that when you write something, all of the data is stored immediately. Redis can kind of do that, but really you can't count on the data. You can't count on the fact that you're never going to lose any data with Redis if it crashes. You will lose, or you will keep most of it, but it's possible with Redis you can lose a second's worth of data here and there, depending on when and how it crashes. But that's okay for view counts. Doesn't matter. You want to keep most of them, but if you don't keep all of them, or if you lose a second's worth of view counts, no big deal. No one's going to notice. So I really like Redis for that use case when you look at it from a persistent data perspective, but also just as a general purpose cache. I use it over Memcache every time now.
And I actually have a tutorial, believe it or not, on counting or keeping view counts in PHP with Redis. So I'll link that down below. I think that'll be helpful for a lot of people.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great tutorial. And I feel like very common use case of something that people do and should do in Redis, or can do better with Redis.
Like you said, it just doesn't make sense to hit the database every time you want to write or read a view count. It just doesn't. And there's also, you've talked about Memcache in your book, and when would you want to use Memcache over Redis?
So the only time today I would use Memcache over Redis. So the thing to keep in mind is that Redis is an event-based system. It's single-threaded. So you can only, if you have this 16-core server and you run Redis on it, Redis will only ever use a single core from that machine. It will use two in the sense that when it makes its backup, it will use a second core. But for serving your traffic, for serving your reads and your writes, it will only ever use a single process on a single CPU. Now it's really, really, really fast, so it doesn't matter that much. But you can still hit a point where you're maxing out the CPU and Redis just can't go any faster. And there's sort of a limit there, and most people won't hit it, but it's there, it exists. And maybe if you're big enough, you do hit it. The advantage that Memcache has is that it's threaded. So Memcache can create a bunch of threads, and it can use all of the CPUs that you have available. So if the thing you're optimizing for is like maximum possible throughput at the expense of less useful data structures, right? In Memcache, you can only set and get a value at the most basic level, where Redis has arrays and it has lists and it has sorted sets and all these other really nice, convenient data structures. You lose those with Memcache, but the thing you get is sort of pure raw speed. Now, again, even at our level at Twitpic, there was never a reason to not use Redis. It was perfectly fast enough and used hardly any CPU. But if you're massive enough, if you have so much data you're trying to write into Redis and you're maxing out the CPU, you can get some more leverage, I guess, out of using Memcache. That's really the only time I would use it nowadays. I don't see a lot of reasons to not use Redis. It's so fast.
And then you also mentioned after Redis, was it Rescue as a queuing system? Is that the one you usually use for most projects, or?
Yeah. So I've gone back. The thing on Rescue, I think, is perfect for getting started with queuing, especially with PHP Rescue, which, believe it or not, after I started at BigCommerce, I realized one of the guys I work with at BigCommerce, who's been there for the past 9 years, he actually wrote PHP Rescue, Chris Bolton.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was super funny because I, had said it was like an amazing thing to use in the book, and I had used it a bunch at Twitpic as well. But I think it's really great for, you're writing PHP code. You're like, hey, I got to put this in the background. I got to run this somewhere else. You want the thing that's easiest to set up, that has really good visibility, monitoring is well understood. Kind of everyone that gets into queuing somehow learns or uses Rescue at some point. So I think it's really good for getting started. I think that as I've grown as a developer and as I've worked at higher and higher scale companies, I probably would use something different like RabbitMQ or NSQ, especially for more things that are like message passing and not just background tasks. But Rescue is still a great choice. I would use that until I couldn't use it anymore, either because I was at too high of a scale, or I needed to do more generic message passing and not just background jobs.
Okay. So now we have the full stack, right? I didn't miss anything, did I? I'm pretty sure I got all of it. And we've got Linux, we've got Nginx with PHP FPM, we've got MySQL, Redis, and the queuing system.
Yeah, that's right. The only thing that I did recommend in the book that I probably wouldn't recommend as much anymore is using HAProxy as your load balancer. Now I would just kind of roll that all into Nginx and use Nginx for all of it. HAProxy is a great load balancer, but benchmarks show it's like marginally faster than Nginx. So I sort of try to optimize as well for least amount of complexity. And we used Nginx for quite a while at Twitpic as our load balancer, and it can do tens of thousands of requests per second with tiny overhead, very little CPU, and like 100 megs of memory usage. So I would sort of optimize for less complexity and use Nginx for load balancing and not HAProxy. But that was something I mentioned in the book that I would probably delete that chapter. It's editing it now.
Okay. Actually, I want to ask you one more question about load balancing, but
sure.
First of all, let's pretend we have a scenario using the stack that you just said, and let's say I spin up an EC2 instance on Amazon, and it's a really small instance. It's going to be a T2 micro, which is really small, and then I've got my Nginx web server database, everything loaded on there. And I've got a decent amount of traffic, but nothing crazy so far. It's being sustained, except maybe one day I get featured on TechCrunch or some big website, and I know for sure that I'm not going to be able to handle that traffic. To begin with, what do you think would be the first thing to either slow down or crash?
Slow down or crash. So with the stack that we just talked about, or
yeah, what would be one of the main failure points?
Yeah, probably the first part that's going to crash on you is if you have this T2 micro, it's kind of running your entire stack. I'm assuming MySQL is also running on that same T2.
Yeah, everything's running on it. Yeah.
Yeah, so probably either you're going to max out your PHP FPM workers, they're going to run out of CPU, or that's probably most likely is that it's just not going to be able to handle the amount of visitors per second that you have.
Okay.
T2 micro, I think, has like 2 CPUs, so
yeah,
you can have
actually I think it may only have one.
Okay, so it has one CPU, so I can handle basically a handful of concurrent connections. Maybe let's say it takes so let's say your website takes 200 milliseconds to generate. That means that in 1 second with one CPU you can serve 5 requests per second, right?
Okay.
So if you have more than 5 requests per second, probably PHP is going to fall down.
Gotcha.
MySQL probably would actually do really, really well, just because the bottleneck's going to be your lack of ability to send it queries, because PHP is going to take up all your server time.
Okay, so is that how you would scale out then, is just bump up, go to something else instead of T2 micro?
Yeah, so at first I would probably I'd bump up the instance type to be something more like a C4, like 4XL, or something that has a lot of CPU power. That's the thing that's going to hurt you at first, is you're just not going to have enough CPU power. I'd bump up the number of PHP FPM workers to take advantage of all this free CPUs that you've just created by having a bigger instance. As that starts to fall apart, which it will once you hit a certain number of traffic, let's say again 200 milliseconds per page, you have 10 CPUs or something like that. Just for easy math, 10 CPUs. That means you should do 50 requests per second, right? With that server, or somewhere thereabouts. It's not. It's more back of the napkin math. But okay, so you can do 50 requests per second. You can probably still scale out to more app servers before you need to really focus on MySQL.
Okay, so so you would scale out to some bigger instance, and then you would start scaling out. I guess you could call it horizontally, right? Adding more servers, maybe more web servers, and then that's when you would implement the hat proxy or Nginx load balancer, right?
That's right. Yeah, and in your particular example, if you were like under the TechCrunch attack, I wouldn't use ELB, which is Amazon's elastic load balancer.
Okay.
Only because ELB requires a warm up time. So basically, you start an ELB and they look at what your traffic is, and then they kind of over time scale how many instances that runs on the back end, depending on what your traffic looks like over time. But if you kind of turn it on and then immediately give it a flood of traffic, ELB will actually die on you. It'll crash because you haven't given enough time to warm up to scale out to enough instances. So you'd actually have to run your own load balancer, and I would use probably Nginx or HA proxy for that, but most likely Nginx. Create an instance. It could be a much smaller instance, and it probably anything but the T2s would probably serve quite a bit of traffic just fine.
And would you recommend Amazon Web Services for most businesses, or are there any other competitors that you've had better experiences with?
No, absolutely. I've gone back and forth on this a lot. And when I first wrote the book, actually, I recommend not using it and using something like dedicated hosting, like SoftLayer or SingleHop, because it kind of ended up being much cheaper at the time per server, per hardware. But honestly, Amazon has dropped their rates probably like 10 times since I wrote the book, and it's really, really competitively priced now.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll find that a hosting provider like SoftLayer is actually more expensive than Amazon. And just the flexibility that it allows you to have, and the ability to really do a lot of creative things. And if you use it right, so if you're using reserved instances, the price is very, very, very competitive.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now let's talk about your Nginx book, because I saw on Twitter that you I'm not sure. When is it coming out, actually? Do you have a release date yet?
Yeah, so it should hopefully be out sometime in September. So it's
Okay.
Nginx book by O'Reilly. I just got my O'Reilly animal, which is really awesome. As an author, you don't get to pick your animal. You kind of get what you get. And I really wanted a cool animal, and I got the Eurasian lynx, which is this like pretty big cat. And it's like what I
Nice.
like about it is it's not so big that it can kill you, but it might be. You know, if you're having a bad day and this thing attacks you, it has a chance. And so that's what I like about it. It's not like a tiger where it's a definite thing. If a tiger
Right.
attacks you, you know, you have no shot. This thing, you like, it probably can't kill you, but you don't want to get too close.
That's funny. Is that random, or is it because it's Nginx and there's some kind of correlation between that? I think I'm thinking
random.
too much into it. I think so too.
All I'm happy is that I got a cool animal. I didn't want to get stuck with an uncool animal.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about the kind of content we can expect to be in that
So
book?
I'm really excited about the book, only because I feel like there's always, when it comes to technical books, there's always an overwhelming amount of really basic, super beginner content. The
Yes.
stuff that you can blaze through really fast, and everything else in the book ends up being just documentation that you can, you know, read on nginx.org or something like that. I wanted to provide something that wasn't so advanced that it was, you know, the most advanced book on Nginx ever written, but I wanted something that really it was really useful. That's sort of the thing I wanted, is the most usefulness in a book. So I'm trying to write, and this, you know, all the content is subject to change, but I'm trying to write something that's sort of, if I was building Twitpic at the time, or if I was scaling Twitpic, would have answered every single question about Nginx that I could possibly think of, solve every kind of use case, kind of really guide me through how do I run Nginx in production. Not like how do I set it up. Anyone can read about that online, but what are the configurations that really make the most sense for a production environment, for environment at scale that can monitor well? What are the ways I should tune Linux and tune Nginx? And also, I really want to understand, and I want people reading the book to understand, what are all those things that you copy and paste off of Stack Overflow and paste into your Nginx file? Like, what do they all actually mean? And you know a lot of the obvious ones, like, okay, what does the port number mean? Sure, you know that, right? But there's a lot of tuning settings and different settings in there that people just kind of copy and paste verbatim. They don't understand exactly what they mean. And honestly, unless I go and do the research, I don't understand what they mean, right? You have to really look it up. Sometimes the setting refers to some value in the Linux kernel. So then you need to go and read the Linux kernel documentation, see what does that thing mean that Nginx is referring to. I want to answer those questions so you can tune your server with like confidence that the thing you're changing, you know exactly what it does and why you're doing it. You're not just pasting it in there because some guy in Stack Overflow says this configuration gets 1,000 requests per second or something.
Right.
So that's what I hope to solve for. Really dig into how to use Nginx as a web server, how to use it to serve PHP, Ruby, and Go, how to use it as a load balancer, how to use it as a proxy, as a CDN. I'm going to have a little thing in there, I think, about how to build your own CDN with Nginx, which should be pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I really look forward to it. That's really exciting. Is there some kind of wait list I can sign up on, or we can sign up on, or anything like that, or is
not
that
yet
coming soon?
But there will be soon, and actually, and probably, I don't know dates, but probably sometime before September, there's going to be an opportunity to get the first 5 chapters of the book for free. I think.
Nice.
Hopefully, cross your fingers. But there's this opportunity. If not, I'm also going to do the O'Reilly preview release, where it allows you to purchase the book early and get the chapters as I write them from until September when it comes out, and then you'd obviously get the ebook or print edition. But yeah, there's going to be a bunch of different opportunities to get the content early that I'm really excited about, and we'll get you on the list to get the full book.
That's awesome. I'll keep an eye out on it too. Speaking of books, do you have any favorite books you'd recommend?
Programming or otherwise?
Anything.
Yeah, so I read a lot. I'm a voracious reader. I read 52 books last year. I'm shooting 100 books this year.
Nice.
So I have an all-time favorite book that I've read. I read it probably every month, so I've probably read it. I really fell in love with it maybe a year and a half ago, so I probably read it about 20 times now. It's not a programming book, though. but I think it's applicable to programmers. And the
Okay.
book is called The War of Art. So it's a play on The Art of War, the
Right.
classic book. The
Okay.
War of Art by Stephen Pressfield is this really, really short. It's like 80 pages, size 14 type font. The chapters are like 3 pages long, but really always kicks me in the ass when I'm feeling lazy or I'm feeling like I want to do this thing, but I'm like procrastinating on it. I'm not doing
Yeah.
it. And this happens a lot, especially, trying to write a book, for instance. Like writing to me is this huge, painful process, and I'm always procrastinating on it and not doing it. And the War of Art is about resistance and fighting this resistance that stops you from doing your best creative work. I really love it. I highly recommend it. It's like $7 on Amazon. You can read it in an hour. It is
I'll pick it up.
one of my all-time favorite books. Like I said, I read it every month. You'll
Very
find
nice.
a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of really well-known people actually also recommend the book. It's the book that I give out to everyone. When I moved to San Francisco, I gave away all my books, and I had like almost 12 copies of The War of Art that I had to give out
Wow.
because I just buy it in bulk and then just give it to people. It's that good.
I'll pick up a copy then.
Yeah,
Appreciate the hint. All right, one more question, then I'll let you go. What are you up to nowadays with BigCommerce?
Yeah, so I started at BigCommerce probably about 10 months ago now as principal architect. We are opening a San Francisco office. So BigCommerce, take a step back. BigCommerce is e-commerce software as a service. So you want to sell something online, you come to BigCommerce, you set up a store. We kind of take care of the rest for you with our hosted software. So we're doing a lot of really cool things with PHP and Ruby and Go. We're building a SOA platform, so lots of microservices that all talk through a REST API. I'm trying to do more and more with Go. I really like Go as a language, and I think it's a great choice for building a lot of backend services. But yeah, it's really fun. Really fun. We grew the team super fast, so we built up an office of about 100 people in San Francisco just last year.
Wow.
And yeah, really, it's cool to be part of a growth startup. Something much bigger than Twitpic. Twitpic was 10 people at the biggest. Now, BigCommerce is massively bigger than that. It's really, really fun to work with really smart people that sort of embody the kind of get shit done mentality to just constantly ship. That's sort of something that's really, really important to me, is to always be shipping stuff. I don't like to sit down and contemplate all of the decisions. I optimize for 80/20, and it's really fun to work with sort of a like-mind group of people that just also want to do the same thing, just ship really awesome stuff constantly.
That's the kind of people I really want to have on this website, is people who just ship all the time, ship fantastic products. And I said that was my last question, but you just brought up another one. Do you have anyone you recommend that I should interview?
Who should you interview? Have you interviewed Phil Sturgeon yet?
No, not yet.
You know who he is?
I've heard the name, but I can't make a connection right now.
Yeah, so he's the guy that runs the PHP League. He's has a pretty big voice in the PHP community.
Okay.
He would be really interesting to interview. And then there's also the guy that wrote Servers for Hackers.
Yes.
He'd also maybe be an interesting interview for this podcast.
I actually have his book too, so
awesome.
I've thought about sending him an email. And
yeah,
probably do that next. Servers for Hackers. All right, Steve, thank you so much for your time. I mean, this is a really good interview, but like I said, I knew this was going to be a good interview. From all your interviews I've seen and your writing style and everything like that, you just got such a great energy about you and the products that you do. We can tell that you really love coding, which is what I do as well. I love it so much, and that's why I started this website. But anyway, diverging here, I've learned an immense amount from your book, your public speaking, and this interview, and I'm sure other people will as well. And if they want to stay in touch, or if they want to keep learning from you, how would you recommend they get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. So they can reach me in 2 ways. There's my website, stevecorona.com, STEVECORONA.com, and there's a contact form on there if they wanted to reach me personally. Or I'm on Twitter as well. I'm addicted to Twitter. It's at Steven with an N, so STEVEN Corona, CORONA on Twitter. And either way, they can reach me. I'm very responsive, so love to hear it back. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for listening or watching the interview. And if you have any questions, or if you'd like to leave a comment and tell Steve how much you learned from this interview, please do that in the comment section below. And thank you all for watching.
Thanks
Until
for
next
having
time.
me.